Welcome. I am Myrtle Hendricks Corrales, Board Chair of the Pax Christi International Fund for Peace, which many of you know was established 10 years ago to receive tax-deductible contributions to Pax Christi International from our U.S. donors. We are so happy that you are able to join us today to learn about unarmed civilian protection in Palestine, an important proposal to send to Gaza and the West Bank hundreds of trained, unarmed civilian protection veterans who have worked in violent conflicts around the world. Unarmed civilian protection in Palestine is one of the many examples and one of the many ways that we can make nonviolence real in a violent world. When chaos and violence seem to be on the rise, it helps to remember, much more than we are led to believe, nonviolence works. Over 60 non-governmental organizations now practice unarmed civilian protection in 30 areas in the world. At least 20 of these groups have had experience in Israel and the occupied territories of Palestine. I am delighted to introduce to you two people with deep unarmed civilian protection experience. Mel Duncan is co-founder of Nonviolence Peaceforce US, a world leader in unarmed civilian protection. He has received many prestigious awards and was named by the EAPPI reader as one of the 50 visionaries who are changing our world. Mel is the creative force behind unarmed civilian protection in the Palestine proposal. He can help us understand its potential and answer all our questions. Ann Farr is a longtime leader in Pax Christi, England and Wales, and a former board member of Pax Christi International. She has served as a human rights observer in the West Bank for the Ecumenical Accompaniment Programme in Palestine and Israel, known as EAPPI, and she has worked for years to promote respect for human rights, social justice, and a just peace in Palestine. We will hear from Mel first about the basics of the unarmed civilian protection in Palestine proposal. Ann will follow to share her own rich experience of providing unarmed accompaniment in the West Bank. As you listen to Mel and Ann, if you have any questions, put them into the Q&A box, and we hope to answer your questions at the end of their presentations. Mel, if you would begin.
Well, thank you, Myrtle, and good evening and afternoon to everyone, and thank you for being here. I'm going to share my screen and share some photos with you. Can everyone see the slide? Okay. What I'm going to talk about today is a proposal to send, as Myrtle explained, hundreds of veteran unarmed civilian protectors to the West Bank and Gaza. Part of the good news is that with Nonviolent Peaceforce and the many other groups who have been doing unarmed civilian protection and accompaniment throughout the world now for decades, have created hundreds, if not thousands, of veterans who are around the world who are able to do the kinds of activities and functions that are necessary to bring a sustainable peace in those areas, and to do the kinds of things that are being asked for at this moment. And so I'll go through those in a few moments. I do want to say that this, while I am a co-founder of Nonviolent Peaceforce, This is a proposal coming from a consortium of groups and not Nonviolent Peaceforce. So a bit of a breakdown or taxonomy, if you will, first. Nonviolent, creative, organized applications of nonviolence can be applied in many different ways. But I want to be clear about what I'm talking about. Most frequently, when we think about active strategic nonviolence, people think about civil resistance. We think about the kind of active protest to disrupt and change the status quo. Famously brought to the world's attention by Gandhi in the Free India movement, in the US Civil Rights movement, more recently in the Black Lives Matter movement, and even more recently in the ceasefire and ending of US aid to Israel that we saw rise up last spring, really throughout the world. So that's one application of organized strategic nonviolence. A second application is using nonviolence to defend the status quo. And this has been done in a variety of places. It was done in the Baltic states in the 1990s. More recently, it was done at Standing Rock, in the Standing Rock Nation, in the areas surrounded by North Dakota in the United States, when they were trying to stop a pipeline from going through just north of tribal lands that is polluting the major water source for that tribe. While many people saw that the tribe's work and the water protectors' work was civil resistance, it was really using nonviolence to defend their land. What I'm talking about today is using organized strategic nonviolence to protect civilians and to prevent further violence applied in an effort at solidarity. As Myrtle mentioned, we are aware of at least 61 organizations that are doing some form of unarmed civilian protection or accompaniment in the world today. And I want to stress that that means that we're aware of them. Selkirk College in Canada is keeping a database. That's how we know this. But there are many more organizations that are popping up and that are doing this work. And we're trying to make the training and the methods and support available to groups so that they can pick up and do this. While it does require training and discipline, it doesn't require a lot of funds. It doesn't require a lot of equipment or material. And so groups can pick this up, whether it's on a neighborhood level or on a country level. We've been studying this over the past few years and bringing together people who have been doing this work, their partners on the ground, and academics who have been studying this. And what we've found is that when we talk about this, we are talking about a paradigm shift in the way that protection is approached in the world. If you look at the photo in the middle at the top, that is peacekeeping of the 20th century. When you look at the photo at the right, that's what peacekeeping and civilian protection will look like in the 21st century. Organized, active, not passive, but active people, organized to protect themselves and their communities. And what we find more often than not is those efforts are being led by women. And when we studied this throughout the world, we had 6 regional workshops followed by a global gathering of people. The things that we found that the groups have in common is that they are nonviolent, that they rely upon nonviolent methodologies, that they are human-centered, that they are based upon people-to-people relationship is the major means by which they protect. They are built from the bottom up, not from the top down. They, more often than not, are reliant, as I said, on the leadership of women and youth. They recognize and rely on the primacy of local actors. They express solidarity, and not always, but most often, they work in a nonpartisan fashion. That is not always true, though. As I said, they are based upon relationship and trust building, and they've been proven effective in some of the most violent areas in the world. We know from a growing number of studies, and there is now a database that is keeping the research on unarmed civilian protection, that local knowledge is crucial, that unarmed civilian protection and accompaniment works through building of strong and trusted relationship. And this is key, that the use of nonviolence is not just unarmed actors. It's not just putting soldiers in without guns. It is an entire different mindset of proactive strategies in terms of violence prevention and civilian protection. As I said, we're being studied more and more, both quantitative and qualitatively. One of the most studied is a group that primarily works in the US, but not exclusively, called Cure Violence, that works with urban violence. And there you can see a quantitative study that was done on work in San Pedro Sula in Honduras, where they looked at area by area and saw a precipitous drop in shootings and killings when they started work there. And that was shown quantitatively to be successful. And there are a growing number of studies that prove this, because we're often, when we talk about this, people will say, well, that's fine, that's idealistic, but does it really work? And we are showing time and time again in area after area around the world that it does in fact work. So in looking at how this might apply in a larger scale in Palestine, I first want to emphasize that it is working in Palestine right now. We've had an assessment team that has been looking at how a larger scale team of unarmed civilian protectors might work where, with whom, and how. They completed their work yesterday. I had a chance to meet with them. And one of the things that they shared with me is they found 22 different groups that are working today in the West Bank. Now, we do not know of any group that's working in Gaza, but 22 that are working in the West Bank, providing civilian protection. Most of them are Palestinian and Israeli groups. There's 5 international groups that are working. And these groups are successful. They are protecting people. The photo that you see on your left is a humanitarian brigade that at the end of May went to a roundabout where aid trucks had been attacked by settlers, and the food that was destined for Gaza had been destroyed. And they showed up to protect the next convoy. And settlers did, in fact, arrive, and the humanitarian brigade was able to interpose themselves and to stave them off long enough until the police came and were able to break things up. The convoy went on. It went to the next checkpoint, and they were attacked again by settlers, but the brigade showed up and were able to protect the food, and the food was able to go on to Gaza. If you look at what is being asked for by the UN and by others, Francesca Albanese, who some of you I'm sure are aware of, the Special Rapporteur for Palestine for the UN Human Rights Council, in her report, she specifically talked about deploying protective presence and cited the work that was being done by the Palestinians and Israelis that were coming and protecting one another and calling on an international presence to be deployed. And we can do that. We can follow up on that. And when you look at other resolutions, for example, the ceasefire resolution that was passed by the Security Council in March, not the most recent one, but the one in March, listed specific things that needed to be done. And the things that both that were in that resolution and Ms. Albanese's report included protecting the safe and efficient provision of humanitarian assistance and medical care, accompanying people under threat, interpositioning between conflicting parties, ceasefire monitoring, reporting on compliance with international law, and providing direct protection to civilians. These are exactly the things that unarmed civilian protectors have been doing in areas of violent conflict now for decades, and have been dealing with violent governments, dealt with the government, the Duterte government in the Philippines. They dealt with the government in Colombia. We've dealt with the violent government in Burundi, in South Sudan, and also dealt with violent non-state actors like the Tamil Tigers, like the FARC. And so there is a vast reservoir of experience out there. For example, the safe provision of humanitarian assistance in South Sudan. This was an example of getting assistance to an isolated area that was in rebel territory, where I actually took this photo, where we had to get aid to 2 villages that had been isolated because they were in rebel territory. We had to negotiate first with the rebel group and then get passage, and then go, as you can see, go through some very, very difficult territory to get there, but to open it up. And once we opened it up and went, other humanitarian agencies followed us when they realized that it was safe. Accompaniment in Palestine. Ann is familiar with this road. Groups have been providing accompaniment to school children, to farmers, to people in olive groves, to people at checkpoints for many years. This can be scaled up. When I talked to our team yesterday, our assessment team in Palestine, I asked them, what are the major messages that you would like me to convey today? And the first thing is, there's major urgency here. Almost everyone we talked to said, come now. And there's urgency, not only the well-known urgency in Gaza, but also the increased violence that has dramatically increased even since a week ago Friday and the ruling by the International Court of Justice. Interpositioning, another thing that was called for, has been done many times. This is in my hometown of St. Paul, Minnesota, at the Republican National Convention, people interposing themselves between police and demonstrators, and preventing violence. Civilian-based ceasefire monitoring. This will be key. If and when there is a ceasefire negotiated, that will be the beginning, not the end. In Mindanao in the Philippines, which went through a very violent period, and in 2009, Nonviolent Peaceforce was invited by both the government of the Philippines and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front to be a major part of the ceasefire monitoring team, which we did for 4 years and engaged 1,000 civilians in monitoring the ceasefire. And that was a success story that led to a peace process that is still in motion. And it's been studied thoroughly. You can look at that, but civilians will have to be engaged in their own ceasefire monitoring, because that's what truly leads to peace building when there is a ceasefire that is negotiated. This is another statistical analysis that shows the ceasefire was called in December of 2009. And once it was implemented, you can see that violent skirmishes between the government of the Philippines and the MILF dropped by 100 in the first year and continued to drop. And by the third year, we're at 0. Also, monitoring and reporting on international law. CEPAZ, a group in Mexico, not only provides protective presence and accompaniment, but has been doing tremendous reporting on violation of human rights and reporting this to the various international bodies so that they can act on it and advocating for that actions. So there is that need to have that chain of information coming from the ground and going up so that the civilian protectors on the ground are not just working in isolation. And direct protection of civilians. One of the most important things happening in South Sudan is the emergence now of over 100 women's protection teams or peacekeeping teams who are providing peacekeeping and protection in their own villages and are stepping up and acting on their own agency. And this has been a remarkable change in terms of people's ability to express themselves, and especially women, and women acting in a society where in the past they had been treated as property. And when I say that there's many of us out there, this is the group that came together in Geneva in October of last year. We actually arrived on October 7th and were greeted by, we came in hope and were greeted by horror. But this is just an example of veterans who are out there, who could be called upon, who could be deployed. We have the training, we have the trainings. We can deploy rather quickly. So what needs to be done? I think when I'm talking to you, I'm very aware of Pax Christi now for decades. I know what you do. I was involved at the conference at the Vatican in 2016. Raise your prophetic voice. Make sure that it continues to be heard. This is an actionable, nonviolent approach that we can do. We can do it, and we can do it now. Now, I'm not asking you, but we have to advocate for $4 million. This costs money. We have to transport people. We have to train people. We work on a longer term basis. We're asking people to commit to at least a year. And so it does cost money. It costs a lot less than any other form of military intervention, but it still costs money. Please educate the Vatican and your church structures to actively support this proposal and advocate for the mission of the Holy See to support us at the UN. And if you have experience, let me know. We are starting to keep the roster to recruit people. And finally, if you want to volunteer, my email is there at the bottom, and I'll be happy to put it in the chat. All of us, except a couple of the people on the assessment team, got a small stipend, but the rest of us are working as volunteers, so we need plenty of volunteers. And just in closing, you know, we're constantly being astonished these days at the amazing discoveries in the field of violence. And it is astonishing. But Gandhi said that he maintained that far more undreamt of and seemingly impossible studies will be made in the field of nonviolence. And that's what we're co-creating. And so I look forward to that co-creation with you. Thanks.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much, Mel. And now we look forward to hearing from you.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to join you what is it? It's this evening for me, but this afternoon for you. And thank you very much, Mel, for your presentation. It was so interesting to have the whole idea encapsulated in what you said. And I recognized quite a lot of it from things that I saw in South Africa in the 80s. Yes. More recently, my experiences in Palestine. And I visited Palestine for the first time with a Pax Christi group over 20 years ago. And I was reasonably well informed, I thought, but it was a huge learning experience at the time. So following that, because I felt I needed to learn more and to be there more, I continued to visit. And then I applied to the World Council of Churches program, EAPPI, to be EAPPI, Ecumenical Accompaniment in Palestine and Israel, to be an ecumenical accompanier. The program was set up in 2000 in response to the church leaders in the Holy Land asking for the church worldwide to stand alongside them. And from the very small beginnings of one placement, the program has grown and now involves many other countries. From the beginning, Pax Christi International has been very much involved, both in its setting up and then as sections have taken responsibility for the selection and the training and support of their volunteers. And it's really good that Pax Christi throughout the world is a partner of EAPPI. Here in the UK, the training and support work and the selection is very ably done by the Quakers. Every ecumenical accompanier serves for 3 months, and then in the UK is committed to doing advocacy, both during and after their return. And within the field, we work very closely with other peace groups, both Palestinian and Israeli. And we're not on one side or the other, but we're very much basing our work on justice and international law. It's very difficult for me to choose from the number of stories that I have about my work there and all the visits that I've made ever since I served Ecumenical Accompanier. Almost every year I've been there. But I'll tell you about 2 villages. I served for my 3 months in the north of the West Bank in a very tiny village near Nablus. It's surrounded by aggressive Israeli settlers. And we were there to provide a protective presence, to monitor human rights violations, and to undertake advocacy with our own church and civil constituencies, as well as with our political leaders. We monitored all the Nablus area and the Jordan Valley. And it's difficult to explain the deep sense of responsibility, but also of friendship and trust that develops between the teams and the communities that they accompany. Each placement is different. Some monitor checkpoints, others accompany shepherds, and as Mel showed in his slides, accompanying children to school, something that we did quite a lot in our area. And some are accompanying, as I said, accompanying shepherds, and others are in outlying herding villages. And you can imagine the difference between serving in Jerusalem or Bethlehem and being in the South Hebron Hills, or perhaps in the northern West Bank. The village I lived in was tiny and is now approached by one single road because all the others have been cut off by Israeli settlers. who surround the village in settlements on all the hilltops. For years, they repeatedly attacked the villagers and stole their land. And in 2000, the villagers were forcibly and violently removed and went to the nearby town. On hearing this, Jewish and other internationals came and said, if the villagers wanted to return, they would go and live with them. And from then until a short time before COVID, the village was never left unattended because their position is so vulnerable. Each term, when the serving team was on their midterm education week, some of us who'd served there would go and spend a week. And so we were able to maintain contact with the families. The families which opted to return were given new boundaries by the Israeli mayor and the settler leaders, and told that if they crossed them, they would be shot. The first thing we learnt, and the first thing we taught other visitors on arrival, was where these boundaries were. They're not as obvious as the ones that we see as visitors, such as the walls and the fences elsewhere in the West Bank, but you have to know where they are. The families have lost increasing amounts of their land, and now they've got very little left. They're unable to grow sufficient crops, graze their sheep and goats on the fields, or tend their olive trees that are now near the ever-increasing settlement buildings. One of the things that we did, depending on the time of year, was to help with the olive harvest. And as the years went by and we went there at different, year after year, we found that the violence from the settlers, while we were out helping to pick the olives, was increasing all the time, watched by the Israeli military. And then the villagers would be told that they would not have access to their trees to pick their olives. We were told that it was better if we were there, but sometimes we couldn't solve all the problems that we hoped to. The villagers no longer have the old pathways and roads that connected them to the nearby villages over the hills and where they had many relatives. And they've lost income from selling the eggs and cheese and other products as they have no easy means of transport. And they live in great poverty. Always, we worked with the families and with the children. There's a little tiny village school, which the Nablus Authority has tried to maintain. And when in the village, and there was always one of us there, and two on Saturdays, we spent time with the families in the school and holding activities for the children. We were regularly visited by the armed settlers coming down through on walking tours and coming down from the villages, from their settlements on the top of the hill. And at the first sight or sound of settlers, the children would run to us, shouting a warning, and we would ensure that everyone was safely in their homes or out of sight. Our job was to monitor where the settlers went, to take photographs, and to write the inevitable reports. Another of the villages that we visited regularly was the herding village of Kirbotana, a village that is etched into my mind, as alongside our regular visits to keep in touch with the villagers who live in tents with their herds of sheep and goats on what looks like incredibly barren land, we were called every month to attend when their homes had been demolished by the bulldozers of the Israeli military. Mel showed us a slide of the demolition in Palestine, and we frequently saw in different places scenes like that. We were never allowed in when the military was still there, but when we did get in, we went to each tent to listen to the accounts of each family, and we were standing in the rubble of their demolished homes to take notes. We were surrounded by the half-buried remains of their simple possessions and tried to find out what support they might have. Sometimes the Red Crescent was there too, usually providing new tarpaulin for shelter if they had any, though often the families went to the surrounding caves. On subsequent occasions, the military ransacked all their possessions, both from their tents and in the caves, stealing anything that could be used as a shelter. I remember Rafi. When we first met him, despite the devastation of his simple home, he sat us on a nearby wall, made us tea, and regaled us with the stories of his time in the Jordanian army. The second time was very different. Like all the families, he was mainly concerned about his animals, as it was very cold at night. He told us that he had begged the soldiers not to harm his ewes and the newborn lambs, but they crushed them anyway. I will never forget his haggard face, his deep hopelessness, and his repeated refrain, "What have we done? What have we done?" All the water butts were destroyed, and as it got dark, we could see fires gradually being lit around the area as families gathered around them for warmth. Our final stop in the dark was with an elderly couple who were living in a cave and who made us tea, and we drank with them around their fire. They said, "We were born here. Where should we go? What can we do without our animals?" At times, we wondered about being there at such a time when we had nothing practical or financial to offer them. But we were repeatedly told, "You are welcome. You are our neighbours. We need you here." Every village we visited had endless stories of violence, theft, destruction of water sources, and other violations of human rights and international law that we listened to and noted for the detailed reports that we wrote each day. These informed our sending country EAPPI office, our government offices, and the United Nations. This means that there is a huge body of evidence collected over the years by those of us that have witnessed and reported on what we have seen. Every village that we went to wanted us to be there more and to live alongside them. We regularly heard the comments at checkpoints in towns and villages that the presence of international accompaniers made a difference, that it tempered the behaviour of the Israeli military. And I hear that echoed in what Mel said just now. Come now. It's a huge privilege to live alongside others at different times and in different places. Accompaniment is an important part of peacemaking, and we learn so much from those that we accompany, whether it be locally, in our wider community, or in areas of conflict. In all of this, the selection, training, support, and follow-up of those who apply to serve is vital. We are incredibly lucky to have the Quakers in the UK and Ireland undertaking this work, and it's important that Pax Christi International and its sections are partners in the work of peacemaking through accompaniment, witnessing, and advocacy for justice. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. Thank you, Mel and Ann. Thank you very much. I do have a question, Mel. How much previous experience will you require for those interested in participating in the Unarmed Civil Protection in Palestine effort?
It will really depend on where the experience is. We would like people to have at least a year's experience. However, if they have directly been working in Palestine, we would consider less experience.
Okay. Also, when do you think the Unarmed Civilian Protection in Palestine project will be ready to send a team to Palestine?
Well, that really depends on the money and the acceptance.
Okay.
Once that gets in place, we could train and recruit, train, and deploy in about 3 months.
Okay, well, that goes with this next question. Do you expect to receive financial support from the UN governments?
Yes.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is that our work, or I should say the work of Nonviolent Peaceforce and some of the other organizations doing UCP have received support from UN agencies and from various other governments in the past.
And what will be the greatest challenges to deploying UCP in Palestine, especially Gaza?
Well, the openings into Gaza. Right now, there are no ways to get in. We believe, though, with a ceasefire, if it's done correctly, there will be openings. And there are proposals. For example, the Arab League is suggesting that armed peacekeepers be sent in. And the armed peacekeepers are just not fit for purpose. And so we believe that when there is a ceasefire, that deploying unarmed civilian protectors would be much more appropriate. And that would be the moment then for us to deploy there. However, we could deploy much earlier in the West Bank, but then we face currently the same problems that the Ecumenical Accompaniment Project and others face in terms of getting into the country without the diplomatic push that we're going to require to be larger scale.
Okay. And then Ann, how did your experience of participating in EAPPI affect your personal journey?
Unbelievably so. I mean, I know others will also have the same same experience. The people and the country and the work that's needed, it gets into your system, and it's in there with you, almost like part of your DNA. And we have a commitment to advocacy at all levels when we return. But it becomes not just something that we've signed up to, it becomes part of our lives. And we have a network here in the UK, which is very valuable. And it's a very close network of people that have served. I find it incredibly privileged to be part of that network. And we can use it to support each other, to ask questions, to really be there as a backup for each other. And it's quite difficult to describe precisely how it affects you, but it really does mean that Palestine and the work for justice in Palestine and Israel is at the forefront of everything that we do, and certainly at the forefront of everything that I find myself doing. It equips you for work that needs doing. And I remember when we were lobbying in the European Parliament, we went to see almost all the European parliamentary members. And I remember one particularly when we offered to send him further information. He said, I don't want any further written information. Your eyewitness reports are what I need and what makes a difference. Mm. And that I have learned all the time. And when people, I remember when I first went to Palestine, I was staying in Bethlehem, and one of the young people said in the family I was staying with said, does anybody know what's happening to us? And we said, yes, they do, many do, but more will, because we will tell your stories. And I think the telling of the stories of things that you have seen, like the picture that Mel showed of the children of the Ecumenical Accompaniment walking behind two soldiers, that's a road that young people travel every day to school, both young girls and young boys going along there, and being alongside them, it doesn't leave you. It stays with you, and the people matter to you. And Mel talked about the relationships that form, and that it's the trust and the relationships that build up and enable you to do what you do. And also the training in nonviolence, the working alongside others, the trust between team members, and the support you get from others who are upholding you, from those who can't go but want to uphold you when you're there, and the official support from the others, like for us in the EAPPI office. It just becomes something that's all part of all of us that have served, I think.
And Anne, here's another question, almost touching on what you were just saying. What concerns do you have about the safety of accompanying groups given the challenges now?
There are challenges, and I've heard from the EAs who have returned recently, because the Ecumenical Accompanires are working in the West Bank at the moment. Mel mentioned even getting into the country is a challenge for some people with different passports. That the training is very, very important, and the trust of the teams. You need to be trained in non-violence. We had very, very clear guidelines of what was helpful and not helpful. So, you know, how to talk with soldiers, how to talk with settlers, or how not to. You know, it's as you need to know when not to engage as well, because that is not helpful either for those you're alongside. So for the experience and the training is absolutely vital, and the trust with the group, and that means that the selection has to be good, and you have to trust each other. And that is work that we do. You know, when we're there, we have constant conversations and planning and everything else, and feedback and debriefing. I think that if groups are going in, then obviously I think that it's a combination of experience. Having served somewhere for a length of time doesn't necessarily, I guess, make you a good accompanier, but it's a combination of many things, and working as part of a team is one of them. But I don't think anybody would be sending teams in to do anything if there were overwhelmingly major challenges to their safety. And always it's monitored as people, you're reporting all the time. So the monitoring of that is very important. I don't know if Mel may have other things to say on that.
Mel, did you want to add to that?
Well, yeah, training is essential, and even for veterans, we're planning on that there would be a 2-week online training followed by a 2-week face-to-face training, and while we do take on a certain amount of risk, we are not doing this to make ourselves martyrs. As one of my colleagues once said, martyrdom isn't a very sustainable strategy. And so we are constantly doing risk analysis and not sending people, and at times withdrawing people when the risk becomes too great. Because it doesn't do any good for us to send people in to get killed.
Yeah. Okay.
And I don't say this with any, I say this with great humility, that Nonviolent Peaceforce has been in the field for 21 years now, and we've not had anyone killed. And that's partially because of grace and partially because of diligent work.
Well, thank you, Mel. Thank you, Ann. Thank you. Thank you very much. And also thank you to Teresa DeVio, our Pax Christi International Development Officer in Belgium, who has been working very on this webinar, managing the technology for the webinar. Now I am delighted to introduce to you Marta Inez Arrow, Pax Christi International Secretary General, who comes to us from Colombia.
Thank you very much, Myrtle, our speakers, Mel and Ann, and thank you all for joining us today. Your presence and engagement are a testament to our shared commitment to peace and justice. At Pax Christi International, we strive to build a world where human dignity is upheld, conflicts are transformed non-violently, and justice prevails. Our mission is critical, and we can't do it alone. We relied on the generosity of supporters like you to continue our vital work. Today, I'm inviting you to join us in a more profound way. Your donations directly support our efforts to promote peace and justice globally, whether it's through our advocacy work, educational programs, or on-the-ground initiatives. Every contribution makes a difference. And I have some exciting news to share. Thanks to an anonymous donor, every donation made until August 15 will be matched, doubling the impact of your generosity up to $25,000. This means your contribution will go twice as far in supporting our mission. Now, we would like to share a special video featuring testimonies from donors like you. We hope their stories inspire you to make a donation today and sustain our mission. Thank you for your support. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Bill Brennan.
And I'm Jackie Brennan, and we live in Olympia, Washington.
With so many hurting places and suffering in our world caused by war and violence, there has to be a better way.
That is why we support Pax Christi and the work they do promoting and teaching the power of nonviolence with practices such as active peacemaking, conflict resolution, and reconciliation, all of which are so very needed to create a better world for us, our children, and for all future generations.
Please join us in supporting this important work. Thank you.
Hello from Texas. My name is George.
I'm Regan.
Alimar!
Yeah, and our little Alimar. It's our pleasure to share with you this video and certainly to thank our friends at Pax Christi International for all that they do throughout the world.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone, for all your work and your presence in this world that we have. You are a beacon of light, and it is the kind of organization that we want our daughter to know about and to give her hope and us hope for a better world and a peaceful world.
Yep, so certainly whenever possible, please give financially, but also more importantly, keep them in your prayers throughout the year. Thank you, everyone.
Hello, friends of peace. My name is Ann, and I live in Northern Virginia, not far from the Pentagon and the CIA. After marching, demonstrating, and rallying for many decades, I now use my resources to support organizations whose work is to affect systemic change in institutions of power. My prayer is that such changes will set humanity on a course of cooperation and collaboration to solve the pernicious issues that impede the peace and justice that our loving God seeks for us. I trust my support for Pax Christi International will inspire young people like my daughters and granddaughters to take up the mantle of peacemaking and working for justice for all. Being older, it is easy to donate to charity through my IRA account, Pax Christi International's Education Fund is a tax-qualified organization that I am blessed to be able to support because everything it does aligns with my conscience and how Jesus calls me to act.
Hi, we are Stephen Gasteyer and Catherine Grosso, and we live in Michigan. We give to Pax Christi International because we believe in the power of nonviolence and the importance of peace. Supporting this cause helps create a better world for future generations.
Nations like the United States spend billions of dollars every year on armaments and training people to engage in war. We believe that we need institutions that provide an alternative, bringing together people from across the world to share experiences of their work. Discourse creates alternatives to the cycles of violence happening in multiple contexts around the world.
Pax Christi International has decades of experience and the connections necessary to facilitate these conversations and to elevate the discussion of nonviolence to the highest levels. This can provide an alternative to the dystopia all around us.
As an example, the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative's conferences and meetings have produced a new understanding of the ways that nonviolence operates, an understanding grounded in the lived experiences of people living with violence. This understanding demonstrates the power and importance of nonviolence to global peace and security.
Indeed, it is through these interactions that we can see alternatives to the horrifying cycles of violence in Palestine, the Central African Republic, Ukraine, Sudan, and many other parts of the world. We also can see and hear alternatives to the ecological violence of the past century.
Following current events can lead to a feeling of hopelessness. There is violence everywhere around us, a disregarding of the basic dignity of people and basic humanity. It is through interacting with organizations like Pax Christi International that we can see some hope for the future of our world. But they cannot do this without our support. We urge you to give generously to Pax Christi International.